In this video, I'm going to be discussing the condition known as four-stroking on a two-stroke motor. Please note, this video is specific to motorized bike kits with single-speed transmission, cheap two-stroke motors, and single-circuit carburetors. I'm by no means an expert, and this is just information I've gathered with my experience riding these bikes over the past few years. This will probably not be as relevant to multi-circuit carburetors and bigger engines on dirt bikes. I'll be discussing the cause of four-stroking, when it's excessive and within acceptable limitations, as well as some of the side effects and how to deal with it. As a point of reference, the bike I'm riding in this video, for an example, has what I consider to be a decent tune for daily driving operations, and I would be happy to run this non-stop for an indefinite amount of time. It's a pretty generic motor, and I don't have this set up for peak performance, just as a cruiser to give you something to target or a goal for you to have as a starting point. Because dealing with this issue and the tune of the bike go hand in hand, I'll jump in and out with commentary and text overlay on the screen during different riding conditions. So first, let's go ahead and see how this bike starts up. This was a cold motor being started for the first time today. It's cool weather outside, so I used the choke until the motor kicked over a few times. After a few seconds, I turned off the choke where the motor began to idle down and stabilize. This is what I consider to be near perfect startup conditions. On a hot day, or a motor that's already warm from previous operations, it's completely normal to be able to start the bike with similar results without using the choke at all. Now let's listen to how the motor runs while it's in its warm-up phase. This can be anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes depending on riding conditions, and the environment, of course. During the motor's warm-up phase, four-stroking is not only common, it's expected, so don't worry too much about how it runs for the first 5 to 10 minutes. In the previous clip, as well as throughout the rest of the video, you should be able to hear the difference between a four-stroking motor and a smooth-running engine. So now I'll try and explain exactly what you'll feel during these different conditions. A four-stroking motor will tend to run rough and can fool new builders into thinking they have a lot of vibration in their engine. A four-stroking motor will make you think that maybe you've poorly mounted the motor or that it's out of balance and it's just poor quality. In most situations, this is not the case, and new builders will often find themselves trying to use rubber mounting material in between the motor and the frame, which can make things even worse. In the previous clip, when the motor stopped four-stroking, it smoothed out considerably and becomes more stable. Not only that, you'll notice the bike will tend to have more power as it transitions from four-stroking to smooth operations. In general, a four-stroking condition is simply caused by too much fuel in the mix. A rich running condition. The motor is getting more fuel than it can use and not enough air. Although there are other things that can affect this, such as ignition timing and port map duration, we're just going to be talking about the tune of the carburetor in this video for a daily driver motor, not getting into any of the performance stuff which can affect this in more advanced ways. Now that we've transitioned from our warm-up phase to normal operating temperatures, let's listen to how the motor sounds after it's been warmed up. But note, this motor is not heat-soaked. That comes after you've been riding for 15 to 30 minutes straight, and the dynamics of the motor will change slightly, which we'll cover later. In the previous clips, you would have noted a mix of different riding conditions, both with the motor operating smoothly and with four-stroking conditions. And you probably noticed something. Most of the time, when the motor is running at its smoothest operations, is during loads, when the motor is under load, such as accelerating from a dead stop to get up to your cruising speed or going up a slight incline. Even wind resistance at higher speeds can put enough load on the bike to smooth out the motor. Before the motor becomes heat-soaked after a long duration ride, this is what I consider to be completely normal and acceptable, as well as safe for the motor. You may also notice this too whenever you rev bomb your motor, holding in the clutch and pulling the throttle wide open. The motor will accelerate to a certain RPMs and then begin to break up and won't accelerate any further. It's done as a bit of a safety feature to make sure these motors don't run away. In a moment, I'll talk about what I like to call sweet spotting the tune. There's a handful of things that can be done to the carburetor and the bike itself to get a smoother running bike under cruising speeds and heavy load conditions. But first, I thought it was important that new builders know this bike and how it's running is completely normal for a stock or very lightly modified motor. So you don't need to chase your tail trying to get rid of every last bit of four-stroking if your bike is running similar to this one. In most cases, a simple needle adjustment in the carburetor to lean out the mix can reduce four-stroking and give you a smoother running bike. It does have its limitations, and we'll talk about that in a moment. In the next few clips, I'm going to apply about half choke on the carburetor to simulate an excessively rich mix, where the motor is getting way too much fuel and or not enough air. An excessive rich running condition has a lot of drawbacks. As you could see in the video, acceleration was sluggish, the motor had poor performance, the idle wanted to constantly die, and there was excessive vibration. The motor was just running very rough. This will also cause your gas mileage to suffer dramatically. You'll also foul spark plugs and cause a lot of carbon buildup on the top of the piston and the underside of the head. The carbon buildup on the head and piston can cause even more issues down the road, which have to do with heat and detonation, but we won't be covering that in this video. In general, a motor that runs slightly rich is completely normal and safe, as it helps keep the motor cool. But if taken too far, your overall riding experience will suffer. Occasionally, you may find yourself in a situation where no matter what you do with the jet or the rest of the build, it still has excessive four-stroking. And if it does it while you're under full throttle and under load, then it's something that needs to be dealt with. And in that situation, it's more than likely you're going to need to get a smaller jet for your carburetor. But on 90% of builds, it's usually never necessary to touch the jet. And here's a few of the things you can do to help sweet spot your motor to give you a nice smooth running bike at cruising speeds. This particular bike in the video has it exactly set up where I want it to be. I like how it's running at the moment, and because I plan on taking this on many long distance rides where the motor will become heat soaked and smooth out even more, I don't feel the need to touch the tune. However, if you would like to sweet spot the motor so that it runs smooth and stable at cruising speed for long distance riding, here's a few things you can do that will definitely help. If your bike seems to be running close or similar to what you see in this video, before making any changes, I highly recommend first taking it on a nice long ride of at least 30 minutes of constant cruising. See if it smooths out even more than it already is. If it does, then you probably don't need to do anything, as you have a good sweet spot as is. However, if it doesn't seem to smooth out, or just runs a bit rougher than you would like it to, here's a few things you can try. Simple, cheap, and most of these free. The first thing you can do is modify the airbox. You drill a few holes to help it breathe even better. I like to combine this with drilling a 1/4 inch size hole in the exhaust cap. This opens the motor up and lets it breathe a bit better. You'll get more airflow without having to touch the jets. And in many situations, this will smooth out the bike quite a bit while also giving you a little bit more performance. Loading down the motor. In many situations, the stock 44-tooth sprocket, especially for lightweight riders and or riders with small tires on their bike, will simply not apply enough load to the motor for it to smooth out ever, no matter what you do with the tune. So try running a smaller sprocket. This will put more load on the motor and smooth it out quite a bit, while also increasing your cruising speed, giving you more fuel economy, and helping cool the motor down. Myself, personally, I prefer a 36-tooth sprocket for long-range cruiser. It applies just enough load to help keep a nice, smooth-running bike. But I've heard the heavier riders, or individuals who have to deal with a few hills, enjoy the 40-tooth sprocket. Adjusting the needle, I believe I mentioned earlier in the video, but just in case I didn't, should be the first modification you make to your bike before doing anything else. It's very common that a simple needle adjustment where you raise the clip to lean out the mix will do a lot to smooth out the bike. And lastly, it's very simple but does cost a little bit of money. The fat belly pipe will do a bit to smooth it out and give you more mid-range performance. The Deluxe from Bikeberry or WC80 from California Motorbikes will give you a little bit more top end while smoothing out the motor as well. Or if you can afford it, the real MZ65 is probably the best way to go. These tuned pipes have dynamics which help smooth out the motor and make it more efficient. Okay, so to recap. What you saw in the video is, in my opinion, a completely normal and well-tuned bike for daily driver operations. This, for a stock motor, is about what you can expect. If you're running close to this, or even better, you're in a good situation. However, the previously discussed tips are things you can do if you really want to smooth out the bike even more, get more power, and make it more fuel efficient. And although the modifications we discussed will help eliminate it even further, it's not necessary in most situations. And if you're going for peak performance, then you're in a different category, where you really got to know what you're doing, especially once you start messing with aftermarket carburetors. You can completely, or almost completely, eliminate all four-stroking on these motors if you really dig into the tune. It's just that once you start doing that, you've probably got enough experience and you know what you're doing and willing to accept the risk. See, these motors, they can run hot, really easy and really fast. So be careful when you try to get rid of every last drop of four-stroking because you might be pushing your motor over the edge. You just got to know what you're doing. But for most of us, this is what you would want to look out for. So I hope you guys got some useful information out of today's video, or at the very least were mildly entertained. And in about 2 days, we're taking this bike and this trailer bike camping. I'm really looking forward to this.